one comment, Commissioner Baker, that we have a 12-inch length limit on the turtle shells, basically, which is very good. It's very conservative regulation that we have in place. We feel comfortable with that for the snapping turtles. Okay, I'm going to go on now and talk about the paddlefish. We've already covered the. Hang on a second. Hang on. Okay, here we are. I've thought a lot about this presentation because most of the commissioners that are here now probably are not familiar with the history of the paddlefish that has taken place over the years, and maybe not know much about paddlefish in general. So bear with me while I give a sort of a background into the paddlefish, what they are, what's the big deal about them, the history of our regulations, and then our recommendations. So we'll go forward from there. But paddlefish are a very an ancient species of fish. They're unique in a lot of ways. They have that paddle, and which is they are native Tennessee fish, but that paddle sort of helps them sense food organisms and things like that. But they grow to a very large size. They live for a long time. They anywhere from 25 to 30 years. I think the longest recorded on record has been aged or been determined to be about 55 years old. They are late maturing in that they don't the females don't begin to spawn or don't begin to develop their eggs until about age 8. And of course, the largemouth bass is anywhere from 2 to 3 years old when it can lay eggs. Bluegill, almost 1 year or less. So these are very late maturing species of fish. And I had to put some science up there, so I put the Chondrichthyes order here just to say that they are related to the sturgeon. That's their close cousin, is a sturgeon. And the unique thing about this order is that majority of their structure, bony structure inside their system is made of cartilage. And they also distantly related to the sharks, which are also cartilage fish too. And another interesting thing, I was looking at pictures and I noticed that if you look at the paddlefish and the sturgeon in the middle and the shark on the bottom, you draw a line, and on the left side of the line, their body shape is all relatively similar. It's just to the right side where the head shape differs. The range of the paddlefish is mostly in the Mississippi River drainage. They're also in the Mobile River drainage and a few other places outside that, including up into the Great Lakes. Their closest cousin, actually their only true cousin, is the Chinese paddlefish, and it's found in the Yangtze River over in China. I was reading a little bit about them, and these are some pictures I got off the internet, but they may be extinct. The last known collection was in 2007, and I think with the construction of the Three Gorge Dam that was built on the Yangtze River recently, they're pretty sure that they're going to these fish are not going to be around. Paddlefish feed. They're called filter feeders. They don't eat big fish like largemouth bass do. They open their mouth kind of like a big whale does when it eats krill, and it filters the organisms through their body. The picture on the bottom left is a picture of some zooplankton, and the picture on the bottom right is some phytoplankton or freshwater algae. But that's what they feed on. And their threats are, the biggest threat right now is the Asian carp, the silver carp and the bighead carp, because these two species of invasive fish also feed on plankton as well. And we've even got some, this is a picture taken in the state of Kentucky in an oxbow lake on the Mississippi River of a paddlefish that was in the oxbow lake along with a very high abundance of Asian carp. You can see the condition of that paddlefish is not very good. So how they are caught? Well, we have sport fishing. We do allow sport fishing for paddlefish. There's a season on them. It's from April the 24th through May the 31st in most of the state. They have a special season in the upper end of Cherokee Reservoir that goes from April 1st to April 15th, but they're caught by snagging. I mentioned, they don't really bite after lures or anything like that, so about the only way you can catch them is by snagging. And then commercially, they're caught by the use of nets. gill nets to be specific. And also, what about, why are they even sought after? Well, they're pretty good tasting fish. They're not bad. I wouldn't rank them up there with crappie or maybe catfish, but they're not bad. They can be cooked, fried, but the biggest way to prepare, and it seems the most popular, is the smoked paddlefish. That's a pretty good way to cook them, way to prepare them. But they're really sought after because of their eggs. The meat is okay, but the real market, the real place that paddlefish eggs are destined to go is for caviar. And you'll hear more about that as we talk today, but the paddlefish eggs are pretty good. They're not quite as good maybe as if you heard in years past about beluga caviar, but they're a pretty good substitute for some of the species of sturgeon caviar that are no longer available. A little bit about the states that are open to paddlefish harvest. There are 8 states that are currently open. You can see Tennessee there. These are all the blue states are open. The red states is where they were historically not necessarily commercially fished, but where their range is. And there were 12 states in 1983, but 4 of those states have closed their waters to commercial harvest of paddlefish. So I mentioned a minute ago about the sturgeon, and I think it's important to point out why we're talking about sturgeon in regards to paddlefish. Well, almost clear across the other side of the world is the Caspian Sea. I might have a hard time pronouncing all those countries there, but there are several countries that surround the Caspian Sea, and for generations and centuries, really, sturgeon caught from the Caspian Sea, particularly the beluga sturgeon, were harvested from this area, and caviar was made or was processed and really used and shipped all over the world for consumption. It's the most famous caviar in the world, I guess. It's coming from the Caspian Sea area. And like I mentioned, the beluga caviar is the one that's the most sought after. But there are other species, too, of sturgeon that around the world. Most of them are imperiled. Some of them are on that list of almost being extinct. And the pallet sturgeon on the lower right is actually a native United States sturgeon. It's found actually in the Mississippi River, in the Tennessee portion of the Mississippi River, but it's on the federally endangered species list, and it cannot be harvested. So going back to the Caspian Sea and all those little countries, excuse me, for a long, long time, the Caspian Sea sturgeon fishery was managed very well. And the Soviet Union was, and all their bad things you can think about them, and the fact that, the evils that you can associate with the Soviet Union, one of the good things they did was that they managed the fishery, the sturgeon fishery and the harvest from the Caspian Sea. And they managed it with an iron fist. They didn't allow, as you can imagine, they wouldn't allow any poaching going on. They had strict regulations, they had quotas, they had harvest regulations in place, and they were able to produce a pretty good, steady supply, sustainable supply of caviar and harvest of the sturgeon from the Caspian Sea during their time. But as the collapse of the USSR in the late 80s, when that happened, it was Katie bar the door. All those little countries that were surrounded, that were once part of the USSR, became independent countries, and they just went after the sturgeon species with abandon, and they didn't abide by the former restrictions that they had when the Soviet Union was in charge, and as a result of that, the sturgeon species in the Caspian Sea have pretty well collapsed. They used to have quotas of the pounds of eggs that would come from the Caspian Sea area that steadily decreased over time, especially after the collapse of the USSR, until today. As a matter of fact, there are no quotas at all allowed from the Caspian Sea on sturgeon at all. So all this was going on, and as a result, when the decline of the sturgeon from the Caspian Sea was taking place, people were looking for a substitute for that. And the paddlefish, is, like I mentioned earlier, is a good substitute for sturgeon caviar. And so they started putting pressure on the paddlefish within the United States. So these are things, this is actually an old slide, but paddlefish in the 1990s, there was increasing pressure on stocks in the United States. The demand is expected to increase because they didn't see that the Caspian Sea management was going to get any better. As I mentioned, they're slow growers. Late maturation makes these species vulnerable to overfishing. And over half of the exported caviar during this time came from Kentucky Lake, or came from Tennessee. Most of those came from Kentucky Lake. So I mentioned export caviar, so we're going to talk about export. Let me go into another aspect of this, and that's with the CITES. You probably heard of CITES. Stands for the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. There are 179 member countries referred to as parties. The United States is one member of the 179 members, so we have one vote when things come up for discussion and voting. It ensures the international trade in wild animals and plants does not threaten their survival in the wild. It establishes a framework with common procedures and mechanisms. And this, just a little bit about the species, Appendix 1, you could call it Group 1 or put another name for it, but they call it Appendix 1 species. And these are those that are threatened with extinction, like the rhinoceros, and it may impact international trade, is pretty well prohibited for those species. But they also have the Appendix 2 species where extinction is not imminent, at least not yet. Trade is highly regulated, and that's where the sturgeon and the paddlefish fall in. They're Appendix 2 species. You may have heard a non-detriment finding, and the objective of that is to ensure the sustainable use of CITES-listed Appendix 2 species in international trade. So talking about paddlefish, they've been listed in CITES Appendix 2 since 1992. There was a petition to put them on the endangered species list in the late 80s, but they listed them in CITES Appendix 2. Most other sturgeon species in Appendix 2 have been listed since 1997. A few of those, as I mentioned, because of their endangered status, are listed in Appendix 1. And the export of paddlefish and its products require a CITES permit. It's issued by the CITES Management Authority, and each country has a management authority. And in our country, it's it's held under the United States Fish and Wildlife Service office, and it's called the Division of Management Authority. And the issue is, this permit requires that the management authority make a legal acquisition finding for the specimens to be exported, and that another division called the Division of Scientific Authority make a non-detriment finding. So the scientific authority and the management authority are required of all countries that belong to CITES to have such an office within their country. Yes. Okay. Sorry. Appendix 1, there we go, Appendix 2. Appendix 1 are species that are basically threatened with extinction. Okay, they're, yeah, panda bear. And the two are not threatened with extinction, at least not yet, but the trade is highly regulated. Okay, you're welcome. Let's see if I can get back. So with that in mind, we're going to go back. I think it would be helpful. Yeah, I actually had one somewhere. Must have drank it already. Thank you, Commissioner Griggs. Helpful to go back and look at the history of paddlefish management in Tennessee. And really, before 1998, there weren't a lot of regulations in place. There was no length limit on paddlefish. We did have a season that was established, I think, in 1993 that was from April the 16th to February 15th. This is almost exactly the opposite of pretty close to the opposite of what we have today. But at this time, it was a meat fishery. It was for their flesh, and it was really not as much interest in the eggs until like I said, about the 90s when the USSR collapsed and the sturgeon in the Caspian Sea was going away, and all the pressure was being put on the paddlefish in the United States, and in particular in Tennessee and Kentucky Lake. So in 1998, because of our concern over the paddlefish and the fact that we didn't know much about them, our agency recommended to close the paddlefish fishery for 2 years because we were that concerned about the paddlefish. I may drink a gallon before it's over. But the met with the commission, and they decided that that might be too drastic. So they set a size limit of 30 inches and a season of November 1 to February 15th, and from April 16th to April 30th. It still actually protected those paddlefish during the spawning time, which was really after the 15th of February up into the middle of April. And then 2000, the commission increased it to 32 inches. In 2002, we recommended, let me go back to 1998 too. I didn't mention that when the commission implemented this size limit of 30 inches, they asked us to do our own study on paddlefish. And I'll go over that in just a little bit, but we did a relatively small study in comparison to other studies that have been done. So in 2002, we asked to increase the length limit to 36 inches and change the season to January 1 to March 31st. And the commission at the time, instead of going to 36, they increased it to 34 with support from the commercial fishing industry. And they changed the season November 15th to April 23rd, and they allowed the blocking of paddlefish. Now, I need to explain what blocking of paddlefish is. Currently, with the 34-inch, it's called EF. It stands for eye to fork. So they're measured from the front of their eye to the fork in their tail. That's how the paddlefish are measured, because their paddles, they vary in length. Some of them are missing part of them. Some of them just grow longer than others. So the standard measuring for paddlefish throughout the country is from the eye to the fork in the tail. And this is basically what, for a paddlefish that's been blocked, they blocked just behind the gill arches, I believe. And we looked at several to try to come up with a standard length for a blocked paddlefish at that. And it came up with 25 inches. This is not something that we've been in favor of. The agency does not approve of the recommendation of the blocking of paddlefish. I think they can also, once their head is cut off, they can snap the fish, the backbone, because it's cartilage, and it can actually make it a little longer. So, but we're going to talk about that again a little bit later too. But this, just so you know, this is what blocking a paddlefish means. So also going on about that time, about 2002 or so, there was a large number of paddlefish eggs that were being exported out of the country, and particularly from Kentucky Lake. I think it was probably more eggs from Kentucky Lake than any other lake in the country, if I'm not mistaken. And so the questions were being asked by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Office of Scientific Authority, are Tennessee's paddlefish being overfished? That brought about the study that many of you have heard about, the paddlefish study on Kentucky Lake by Tennessee Tech University, which was funded by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It was not funded by the TWA, by the way. And so the research questions were, is overfishing occurring? Is bycatch a problem? And are current regulations sufficient to ensure a sustainable fishery? I'm going to talk about the bycatch in just a minute, but this was the report came out in May of 2005, and I won't read that, but it's the title for the project. Basically, the lower Tennessee River, which was all there was focused on Kentucky Lake. A couple of things they found from the study were that back in 1991, when Dr. Tom Timmons from Murray State University conducted a paddlefish study, he found that there were quite a decent number of fish that were older fish. They were 37% were older than age 11. But in 2003, when they did the study, before the season started, they found that very few of those paddlefish were still in the water. Had been probably harvested. And that 8 right there is that little purple line is the line that at which paddlefish begin to mature. The females begin to mature at age 8. One of the recommendations too was to create a refuge for paddlefish. And they found that a lot of the paddlefish that they collected from the Big Sandy area were either immature or paddlefish perhaps that didn't have eggs. And so this was an area that they recommended, and we endorsed to create a refuge. So this is no harvest of paddlefish allowed in the Big Sandy embayment. One of the major things that they found was was the percent of females that will be protected by the size limit. And it's based on a number of factors, and I won't try to get into all that just because it's kind of cumbersome. But basically, they found out that for a 34-inch female paddlefish, they were only, with the length limit of 34 inches, they were only protecting 2% of the females. And at 35, it's 6%. At 36 inches, which is where we are now, protecting 11%. 37, 20, and where we want to go eventually is to what they recommended was 30% protection, which would be 38 inches. Another interesting thing they found out was that the mortality of paddlefish caught in the gill nets increased as the water temperature warmed up. So the monofilament net and multifilament are two types of gill nets. The monofilament, I think if you just took like if you envision it as the fishing line, maybe perhaps it's a single line, or multifilament is a strand of smaller lines woven together. But for some reason, the monofilament, they had a higher mortality with those. They found it from the study than the multifilament. But if you looked at a 20% initial mortality, which is a pretty standard mortality that at the time they were looking at, try to keep it to that, they found that once you get above 58 degrees, the mortality rises steeply. And this is important when you consider the bycatch, because the bycatch is any fish caught in a net that's not the intended target. So if you're after, for example, if you're after a female paddlefish that are 36 inches and larger, then any other fish that you catch in that net is bycatch, whether it's buffalo, catfish, or whatever. But we refer to most of it as the paddlefish that are under 36 inches, females or males or whatever that you're not intended to catch, and you want to save those. You don't want to harm those fish. This is some information. It's a little dated. It was some information on temperatures that were taken in Kentucky Lake. As you see, those little dots represent an individual temperature that was taken, and on the left side is the water temperature. And of course, the bottom is the months, time of the year. And if you drew the lines there at about 58 degrees, it covers those dots on the left side, and then all of them in the wintertime are pretty well covered. Then it starts warming up in the springtime, about the end of March or so. And so that's important to remember as we go forward with why we established the dates that we did for the paddlefish seasons. Discard mortality, bycatch mortality, it's the same principle there, but reduces the number of harvestable adult fish through time. So if you've got the fish on the left, if they were undersized, as I mentioned, less than the 36 inches, if they die as a result of the bycatch from the nets, water being too warm, there's a good chance that you're impacting your future harvestable fish. So management recommendations from the study: reduce the number of commercial fishers, reduce the season length, increase the minimum size limit, and reduce mortality and discard mortality. This is actually kind of a trick slide. Remember I mentioned before that the commission asked us to do a study in 1998. And we actually did, the study we did in 1998 was published in 2002. And these were the recommendations that came from that. The management recommendations, they were before the Tennessee Tech study was done. They were recommendations that came as a result of the work that we did, looking at paddlefish jawbones and getting their age. This is a slice of a paddlefish jawbone. And it's kind of like the tree rings and how we age fish basically through these rings. I won't even go into trying to tell you how old that one is. So the management recommendations in 2002 that I mentioned, and if you go to the management recommendations in 2005 from the Tennessee Tech study, they're pretty much the same, except they're a little more specific. They recommend that the season length close on April the 7th, and that the increase the minimum length limit to 38 inches. So after the study came out.
Bobby, can you hang on just a second? Go back to that last slide, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first three seem pretty straightforward. What does it mean to reduce mortality or discard? What's the specific recommendation behind that?
Okay, it has to do with a combination of those. By reducing the number of commercial fishermen, you're reducing the number of times that paddlefish gets handled It's not, it's really a combination of, and probably the important one is to reduce the season length too. That's the most important one on there. Mhm. Thank you for bringing that up, because I meant to point that out. So a 5-year plan was developed in 2004, actually, to go forward with paddlefish management. And it was in 2004, we were at 34 inches. So we would go to 36 inches beginning in the beginning of paddlefish season 2005. We would hold that for 2 years at 36 inches and go to 37 inches in November 2007. And then in 2008, increase it to 38 inches. So it's going to be a stair-step increase in the length limit of paddlefish almost every year, with the exception of 2005, in which we held it for 2 years. And then and it would remain that way until through 2009. I think we're going to reevaluate at that point to see if we need to change any regulations to adjust them. So in 2005, I'll be a little more specific. Everything except the Mississippi River, those other waters that are inland, limit the number of permits to those sold from March 1 through May 31st, 2006. Reduce the season to November 15th to March 31st. That's reduce the bycatch mortality, as I mentioned earlier. Increase the statewide to 36 inches in November 2005. These are the same things you just saw on the slide before. And in the commission action, they voted to approve those recommendations, except they would exceed, the season would go from November 15th to April 15th, as opposed to closing on, going from March 1 to November 15th to March 31st. So 2006, agency recommendation was to change the season closure again to March 31st from April 15th over concerns of the warmer water and the bycatch again. And to limit the row permits to 80 residents and 2 non-residents. That was based on the number of permits that were sold previously in 2006. And the commission action was they changed the season to close on April the 7th, not March 31st, as a compromise. Go from November 15th, April 7th, and they approved the 80 residents, but they had unlimited non-residents, which is, anyway, I'll go forward. So 2007, the agency, at this point, we were going to the Mississippi River. We recommended to increase to 36 inches on paddlefish and close the season on March 31. Without going into too much detail about the Mississippi River paddlefish, you should know that the river fish typically mature at a smaller size than the fish do in the inland waters, where there's probably as a result of more food, more plankton. They don't have to swim against the current all the time like they do, so they don't burn up as much energy. And but the river fish would typically mature at a smaller size. But I'm not going to get into the Mississippi River, because you'll see why in a minute, but I just want to mention that as part of the history. In the result of the discussion, the commission decided to halt the scheduled size increase that was supposed to go to 37 inches, to keep it at 36 until April the 8th, which was the day after the season closed. And they left the 34-inch length limit on the Mississippi River. So in 2008, we're looking ahead to beyond November. We recommended to increase the length limit to 37 inches and to 38 in November of 2009 to try to get back on track to where we were with the original 5-year plan, and to leave it at 34 inches on the Mississippi River until the Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi Joint Management Plan is finalized. And the commission approved that recommendation in 2008. So in September of 2008, the management plan that was mentioned between Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee was completed. So we brought that back to the commission to say, okay, the plan is completed now. We recommended as part of a joint management of the lower Mississippi River with those other states. Increased to 35-inch on January of 2009, increased to 36 inches in December of 2009, and changed the season to December 1 to March 31. And the commission, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of arguments going on at the 2008 meeting, and the commission just removed all regulations on paddlefish at that meeting in September. They said no seasons, no size limits, basically just have at it. So I think we recognize that wasn't a good thing, and I think even the commercial fishermen recognized it wasn't a good thing. So they asked that they come back in November with the recommendation to try to write the regulation pretty well, something that could be acceptable. And so we recommended to go back to 37 inches, 2008, 38 in 2009, increase the Mississippi River to 35 in 2009, 36 in 2009. The commission enacted at that meeting, enacted seasons that were in place during the 2005 6th paddlefish season. No change to be made for 3 years, basically to keep it at 36 inches from November 15th, April 15th, which is where we are today. We're at that exact regulation right now, 36 inches, November 15th, April 15th is a season. Also in 2008 was, just for your information, was when the commercial fishing lawsuit was filed. It was against the TWA director and the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Commission at the time. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. In 2009, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had observed that they had accepted our plan to go to 38 inches by 2008 and 2009, and they were approving export permits for paddlefish eggs as a result of that going forward. But when the changes were made with doing away with the paddlefish regulations altogether, and then when the commission voted to keep the regulations at 36 for 3 years and not make any changes with no effort to go to 38 inches, as well as the fact that the Fish and Wildlife Service, who paid for the plan, or paid for the study that was done by Tennessee Tech, they had the science in their hand that was recommended to them. They closed the export of paddlefish caviar from Kentucky Lake on June 18th, 2009. And then in 2011, they closed the export of paddlefish everywhere in Tennessee with the exception of the Mississippi River. So also in 2011, the commercial fishing law was passed by the Tennessee legislature, and that was that the agency shall request approval from CITES. The commercial fish, that an agency or a commercial fishing advisory committee be created. The agency shall develop a plan to open new waters. All nets shall be properly buoyed, and that Tennessee residents be given a preference on permits. So regarding the first one, we did that. In 2011, the director wrote a letter to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They didn't request it from CITES. They have to go through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service first, but he did that. The advisory committee was created in 2011. The agency developed a plan. It's actually in December 2011. I got the date wrong, but we did that. The nets were properly buoyed. We came with some regulations on the proclamations that required that in 2013. And also in 2013, we reduced the number of residents from 80 to 70, which was acceptable by the commercial fishermen. So the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee, as we mentioned, there are 9 members. There's 3. We try to get 3 from each grand division. We haven't gotten 3 from each grand division, but we try to do that the best we can. Sometimes they're either not available or just not that many members from one of the grand divisions, so we have to pick up from somewhere else. We also try to get folks that can represent all commercial fishing interests, not just paddlefish, but catfish, turtles, that kind of thing. They serve a 1-year term. They're appointed by the director. And the TWA, we're not members of the advisory committee. We serve as advisors. So sometimes we will host the meeting. We will send out the information to the other members for them to gather, tell them where it's going to be and what it's going to be about. But if it's okay, I would like to, at this point, we do have some members here, and I'd like to introduce some of the members from the advisory committee. Just raise your hand when I call your name out. But Clay Young, where's Clay? There he is. He's back. Ricky Scott. Ricky is also the current chairman of the advisory committee. Mike Kelly, Vincent Kinsey, Mark Butler, and Chad Lane, as y'all heard from earlier. Did I miss anybody that's on the advisory committee that may have walked in? So 6 of the 9 members are here, and I appreciate you all being here today. Okay, we may be halfway through. So that brings us to where we are today and why we are here. We've not gone forward previous to this because of several reasons, and one of them being that the commission passed a regulation that said we would not change anything for 3 years. So we're beyond that. That was 2012. We're to the point where we feel like we have to go forward for various reasons, this being one of them. Kentucky Lake, where the paddlefish study was conducted by Tennessee Tech, where most of the focus of the harvest has taken place, has been on a serious decline. As you can see, since 2006, the harvest has gone down 91%. Some people will say, well, look at Chickamauga Lake, it's been a good one. And with the same scale of harvest, they did have a couple of good years in 2012 and 2013, but it's also going down. So prior to 2011, it was not really a viable fishery, but it has become one because of a pretty good spawn in 2003. Incidentally, 2003 spawn was good for largemouth bass too in Tennessee. And there's been a 63% decrease in harvest from 2012. So when you look at Kentucky Lake and Chickamauga together, you can see it's still not it is in a serious decline. And if you look at the statewide harvest, which includes the Mississippi River and other waters like Lake Barkley, the trend is showing a pretty dramatic decrease in harvest over time. This is the main reason. This is the information we have. We haven't been able to do, and probably couldn't afford to do, another intensive study like was done by Tennessee Tech back in 2003 and 2004. So this brings us to where we are today. These are the proposals that we're bringing forward to consider. And one is the roefish permits. As I mentioned, there are 70 residents and 30 non-residents. When I say the initial proposal, this was a proposal that we presented to the Commercial Fishing Advisory Committee. We met with them back in July, and we recommended 49 residents and 5 non-residents. After discussion with the advisory committee, we settled on 55 residents and 5 non-residents. And what that means is, the maximum is 55 residents, so that once this goes into effect, the following year, whoever drops out, say 2 people do not renew their paddlefish permit, then that number will decrease to 53 residents. And through attrition, if we get down to 40, eventually we'll stop at 40. So that's the recommendation. And should know that I think there were 27 or 28 commercial fishermen have bought a commercial fishing permit since it was implemented, I think, in 2005. Bought one every year. And those people are guaranteed a permit every year. And if you buy one, if you're one of the 55 people that buy that, you're guaranteed to buy one the following year as well, as long as you maintain it. But if you drop out 1 year, you're done. And this is to try to decrease, as I mentioned earlier, the pressure on the paddlefish population in the state. And part of that is the bycatch mortality I mentioned, but reducing the pressure. Season change currently, we're from November 15th to April 15th. We initially proposed December 1 to March 31. That's been a pretty standard recommendation that we've had for probably 12 years or longer. And but after discussing it with some of the commercial fishermen across the state and realizing that there was a difference in the water temperature, especially on the Mississippi River, we reconsidered and decided to allow that to go just from November 21 to April 7th, so we wouldn't be cutting it back nearly as bad. And then after the meeting with the advisory committee, we recommended to go forward with the November 21 to April 7th, but just for inland waters only, and on the Mississippi River there will be no change. It would stay the same from November 15th to April 15th. Water temperatures on the Mississippi River are different than they are from inland waters. They don't warm up or as fast on the Mississippi River as they do on the inland waters, so we're recommending no change for the season on the Mississippi River on the paddlefish. Just a little to remind you again about the season, the water temperature thing and how it is on Kentucky Lake and where it warms up and where it cools down. And again, the reason is because of the mortality of paddlefish that were caught in nets and how it increases as the water temperature warms up, and 58 degrees is the temperature that we've settled on. So we only have like a 20 20% mortality. Gill net mesh is currently at 4.5 inches or less and 6 inches or greater. We proposed a 6 inches and greater from November 21st to April 7th only, except for the Mississippi River. So it basically be prohibited from April 8th through November 20th, which is outside the paddlefish season. It would only be allowed during the paddlefish season. And this was, actually, it was recommended from some of the commercial fishermen. Said if you do away with those 6-inch nets outside the paddlefish season, you reduce the mortality of paddlefish that may be caught for people that are maybe fishing with it for other species of fish. And so after the advisory committee, commercial fishing advisory committee meeting, it stayed the same. That's still a recommendation. Number of nets, we actually had requests from commercial fishermen to reduce the number of nets. If they put out so many nets, they can't tend to them efficiently. They got too many nets out there, they can't get to all of them in a decent amount of time. And we've had a recommendation for as few as 10, and then some thought we should have 14. So we thought 12. That's our recommendation, is 12 nets per commercial fisherman. That's not per boat, that's per commercial fisherman, licensed commercial fisherman.